There's nothing like a good, well planned out video. And this is nothing like a good, well planned out video. I just found another whole stack of bits. I knew there was more. I'm going to have to edit this together now. So much for no editing. Okay, y'all, I'm going to try and do this with no edits, because we don't have time for edits. So welcome back. This is a follow-up video from the Godzilla build behind the scenes. And I said that I would potentially show a bit of the workings that go on into the way I tested out things and made micro prototypes to arrive at the way that I put that Godzilla together. And so I'm going to quickly do that because there's not a lot of you out there, but the ones that are interested, I'm keen to share. So here we go. It's also really getting quite cold. It's evening now. It's nearly 7:15 in the PM, and the heater went off, and I forgot, and now it's really cold. So I'm just going to throw this down, and then we will call it a day. So I guess this is the prototype of the Godzilla. Construction wise, it did change between this and the final one. So this was like a test buck. Parts of this got stitched together and unstitched and stitched back together multiple times while I tried to dial in some of the patterning. And then when I switched over and started building the final one, there were some elements of this that I decided were not going to remain the same. So the final one was still the first fully finished version of that bag. One of the key things that I wanted to change between this one and that final one was the way that the front pockets were constructed. So here, on the normal totes, it's a flat panel. It's just stitched straight onto the bag, and it actually wraps right into the base seam. The Godzilla doesn't have a base seam. It's a fully wrapping construction with something else that changed, but a different way of constructing the bucket, if you like, to try and make it even more even more waterproof, if you like, by removing the seam from the base. You know, you could sit this in a puddle of water and it's going to take longer for that water to find its way to seams than it would otherwise. So I wanted to do something different there, which led to this front pocket panel fixing higher up the bag than, as I say, on the normal totes it fixes into a base seam. Here it fixes onto the front, and I used that as an opportunity to put in a fabric fold to give some sort of extra capacity. So when there's stuff in there, front pocket can kind of bag out. I've done that before on something else that I've made, which completely slips my mind now. I think it's on some pockets in the backpack proto. In fact, it's on the front pocket on the backpack that I'm also developing. So I sort of borrowed that across. But due to the fact that it's, you know, a flat panel and going tightly into the seams, although there is some extra fabric, it doesn't really give you that sort of bigger capacity. And I felt like there's a lot of bag surface here because it's so big, and I felt like it just needed something to break it up a bit more. So I looked at doing like a box construction so that you've got like squared off pockets with the fabric behind, so like a fold, but also a fold all the way up here as well. So it's stitched down the center, but you've got these things. So it gives you a real sort of bit of capacity. This was just some scraps that were lying around. So I tested it out on here, tested out bits of how things were going to fold and stitch, how that was going to work with. So at the top there's like there's a double roll of fabric at the top that's then stitched. So if I'm doing pleats this way as well as double folds that way, you're ending up with 6 layers of fabric, and I needed to check that that wasn't going to look a mess by the time it's all stitched through. And so there were little tests like this using what was the final fabric. This is an X51X pack, which is pretty heavy. So I wanted to make sure of that. So it wasn't going to be contrast stitched, but I used contrast stitching so I could just see really clearly. Or it's probably just what was in the machine, to be really honest with you. But it does help to see how those stitches all land and how it's all going to look. So there are a couple of pieces used to do that. Before I got to that, I tried out, I know this looks like scraps with kids' drawings on. That's because it is. My kids have done some drawings on here, and I have then used that to staple together, try and get those corner pieces in and work out if I can do it out of one piece, basically how it's going to come together to be those front pockets. I did that, and then this is how it ended up. This is the section to give me the way that I want the pleats in the corners to go, and then there was a certain order of stitching all of those parts together in order for me to be able to put it through the machine, because usually you would do the 2 pockets like this separately, and then there would be one of them would be stitched onto the top of the other one. But I wanted to try and see if I could do it out of one piece of fabric, which did work but was challenging. But that's the twin box construction front pocket, and then that's the location for the Velcro patch field. So yeah, I was pretty pleased with that, and that took, I don't have it now, it's obviously shipped out, it's with the customer, but that was a lot of work just went into sorting out that front pocket to make sure it had really useful capacity, brought some detail into the front of what is a very large bag. Then for the top, so the top has it's a kind of a drop zip, but then because of the way I've constructed this panel here, it pops back up. So on the Proto it popped up too much. It's actually based on the construction I use for the utility cases. For this, I literally took the utility case pattern, lengthened it, and used that to construct the top. So it's got the same zipper garages that you get on the utility cases, which are nice. And then it's fixed in. It had to be, perimeter checked to make sure it was going to match together with the drop section of the tote body. And then I had to think through what's going to get lined first, where's the binding going to go, where's the, it's a drop liner, but where's it going to drop from? Is it from the zip or is it from somewhere else in the bag? So there are a few things to kind of think through and work through. And the way that I do that, and by the way, this is basically self-taught, so none of this is necessarily what the pros will tell you, but this is essentially how I work. Oh, look, more sketching, working out all the numbers for that, what became that pattern there. Working out all of how long all the sections are in order to, you can't see that from over there probably, but I've got all the little numbers written for all of the bits before the fold back and everything like that. So there's a lot of basic maths goes on in this kind of thing. But I do a lot of scribbling down of the pattern pieces, and then these kind of like cross sections of how the fabric will fold back, and then which layers the stitching will go through. And so you will find in my various sketchbooks, if you were in here, hundreds of little scribbles of me trying to work out, for example, if you were to cut through this bag and see the cross section of it, you'd see how this panel folds back on itself twice at the top, comes in here, tucks back, then back down, then this panel has to come onto it, has to turn back and land underneath but on top of that panel. How are they stitched together? I don't want any visible stitching, so I've got to work out which bit stitches to what first in order to then fold back and hide all of the construction. So one of the ways that I like to try and work and design or develop usually is to hide construction. It's part of, I guess, my design DNA. The way it's evolved is aiming for like super clean silhouettes, and part of that for me is minimal external stitching or minimal visible stitching. So the front pocket that I was just talking about, it goes away from that. There is more visible stitching, but the Godzilla was so giant, it almost needed it just to sort of break things up and bring in some detail. Sometimes I feel that you need that, and it's a case-by-case basis, but in the main, I work to a sort of an unwritten formula of trying to eliminate visible construction stitching by hiding it in different ways. And so I'm always doing these little scribbly things to try and figure out what order I will build the product in order to hide all of the construction. And as you can see on this sketch here, sometimes it turns into quite a detailed drawing where you can see the front pocket construction, how the panels and the interior panels will all go, where the foam is, where the webbing on the back's going. For the Black Ops webbing details, I've labelled everything, thrown some marker on just to help differentiate between the panels, and that's me sort of working through. Why is it on the very edge of the page and actually not even fitting on? It's because all of this is not, it's not like in my other design work. I'm putting together design work to show to a client, and so approach it in a completely different way. When it's for me to work out a problem, it's just much the same as if you're in your garage figuring out a thing and you just start sketching on a scrap of wood. It's not for anyone else, it's for you to find out, work out how to do something, and that's what's happening here. And so I started that drawing in the wrong place on the page, probably because that was the space that was left on the page because I'd already been scribbling something else. It doesn't matter. No one's ever going to see it. It's just for me. So it's a completely different way of working than if it is for a client-facing design project. There are no renderings pre-making the bag because who would they be for? Unless it helps me, it's not really necessary. So there's a lot of careful but unattractive drawings to figure out the order of things. I then also try to make notes in my notebook, because something like this, you make it once, and then if you ever for any reason want to replicate it, it's very hard to remember how you did something, because you're making decisions on the fly. So if you can make some notes, it means that if you ever want to recreate or something went well, you can then find out why and how. So yeah, we've got a couple of other bits here. Patterns for, that's for the top panel, the pop-up section. Even that, you can see like there are two different approaches. I'm not even sure which way it went in the end, but you try different things out, you see what works. It's very iterative. That's the pattern piece for up at the top. Super Custom Build Proto 1 front placket with the wrap over point, center line, where there's a strap stitch on and stuff. So that's starting to look like my usual patterns. There's another piece. That's a lining panel, work in progress, Godzilla, laptop drop sleeve position. And then pretty sure there's some other ginormous patterns elsewhere. It was a big thing. I'm sure there were some other bits Yeah, there were other bits, but they are all over the shop. But this was me just working out about what's going to happen around this top part. So usually I would just roll the top. I don't want any stitching visible, but it needed something. It needed some structure in there, so I had to work through what type of EVA or padding or did I use interfacing, different options. I had to sort of try out to see what would give me the feel that I wanted. So I've lost that piece, but this was one of the trials where I was working out how the edges are going to join, what kind of construction to do. In the end, I did something which I haven't done before, but just gave a really, really nice and even finish to the way that the side seams were constructed. So I was very pleased with that. I'm just always trying to make it lovely, just trying to really find the best way to make it that's going to tick the same boxes that I've tried to tick with all of the mainline, if we want to call it that, styles where I've refined them and I'm happy with them, and we produce them, you know, day in, day out, as well when the orders come in. But when a custom order or something like that, I don't just want to throw something together. I want to put it together in a way that is that honors the rest of everything that happens here, and so it takes what it takes, and I don't always know what that's going to be until I get involved in it. And so if somebody says, "Oh, can you make this, but could you add a zip pocket onto somewhere?" It might sound like just a simple little addition, but I'll have to think about the construction involved in adding that on. Is it going to compromise anything else on the bag, and how is it going to look, and is it going to fit with my vibe, with my, that's not the right word, is it going to sort of honor the look and feel and the approach that I take with the things that I put together here. Okay, I'm going to call it there. It's 7:32. Catch you soon. So I've just got another little bit to add in. I knew there were other bits that have got lost around the studio, but this is just paper, and come with me. So this is just a paper bag, but sewn. So you should be able to see in there it's actually stitched. So I've used it. This is to try out the two methods for the base construction. So here you've got the way that I've been constructing my beach totes, which I still haven't put any for sale yet, but where you get this kind of look. And then here is where it's like a T-base. I think that's called a T-base. So you can see the side seam and then the base seam. Both methods give the same overall shaping, but look different from the inside, and one has less stitched seams. So this side, because of the fold, there's actually no seam in here. It's a fold of fabric, and the seam is down the center. So I did think this was going to be the way that I was going to go, but actually, because it's such a big thing, I didn't like how this was ending up on that first proto. So paper model, reality. So it kind of ends up not as neatly and flat, not quite as intended. And so I decided to move over to this for what became the final one, just to give a really strong or really stable construction where I knew it was always going to look the way that I had sent it out to look, rather than this where it seems to evolve into its own way of being. But it was stitched on the machine so that I could just see how that was all going to work, and also try out the patterns to check what depth I was going to get given certain measurements and all of that. So don't be afraid to do sewing with paper. And the other thing that I was going to do was just when I was showing you this earlier, it was a bit far away, so just so you can see a bit more. So we've still got the triangle stitch that's always on tops of all of the Ancoats bag company totes, and then you've got the center one, but then you've also got, it folds back, and that's what's giving you that extra capacity. It still goes into the side seam round at the edge, so you're allowing the front to pop out, and that's what's giving you the capacity. And then again, same at the base, so you're getting effectively like a step out, and it's only relatively minor, but it also gives you this sort of shadow gap, if we can call it that, which just worked as a feature line better on the bag. Otherwise, the usual sort of front stitching just sort of got lost in the size of the panel. So this really made it sort of more prominent. And that was essentially, I guess, a design decision as well as a how does it function, what's the capacity. Okay, I'm going to drop this in and then you can carry on where you were. I just found another whole stack of bits that I used when I was figuring out the construction. I knew there was more, as I just might have already just said. I'm going to have to edit this together now, so much for no editing. Okay, so here's another go at me doing those box construction pockets. So much neater than we saw on this. I think this was all just out of my head with no planning. This was just, let's see how this can stitch together. This was after I had learned about the correct shaping for a pattern. So that's from this drawing where I'm starting to figure out this kind of weird box construction thing ahead of this one, which was obviously for the final construction. So I think I used basically this to go ahead and construct this. And then we had a little review in the studio, me and Ray, and decided that if I could get everything to be nice and square, we had something that was going to be quite workable. So it was a good learning sort of process. I was able to see where things ended up based on the dimensions that this was, which I was able to take forward into the final patterning. But yeah, so you can see, I'm going to come in and show you. You can see how you get that construction, you get that depth on the top there to give real usable capacity to the pockets. So you've got another little test there. This one was ahead of this one, just working out bits. Here we are trying out different things for around the top. This was going to be the top. So this is with EVA. I wasn't sure if this would be too much or not, so I needed to trial this. It's 4mm or 3 or 4mm EVA. I needed to see how that was going to affect that top edge. And then, so this is following on from this. So I've talked to you about this, and I talked about the seam here. So this has it's stitched and then turned back on itself, but that way you end up with one part that's thinner and one part that's twice as thick, and it's just not beautiful, and I like things to be beautiful. So I then looked at doing it, splitting the foam. So here the foam is obviously all the way. Here there's no foam. Here there's foam, but I've stopped it just ahead of the seam to try and eliminate bulk around the seam. And then here, so you can see, look how it's thicker on one side, but I have stopped the foam just ahead of the seam just to try and keep that as flush as possible. And it wasn't bad. but it wasn't this. So here, it's all the same height because I've folded back before we go in, and so you get a nice, I don't even know what it's called, but yeah, I tried this baseball style stitch thing on here, or American football, whatever. I didn't do that on the final thing. It was too fussy. It's not really the way we do things. But I did go with the way that the foam comes right up to here. It's just really worked really well. It did mean I had to do some other stuff. So this is bound on the inside and then not seen because it's all with the drop liner. But at some point it has to splay out. So I had to think about that. And I actually can't remember. Hopefully I've taken a photo, but I can't remember how I dealt with that in the end. But yeah, so all together, and I think this is pretty much all of it. But you can see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then this as well, paper but sewn. So 9 sewn micro protos, a full bag proto, tons of sketches. These are just the ones that were lying in the pile. My sketchbook is laden with sketches while I was trying to work things out. So yeah, there was a lot in it. I don't know where I'm going to cut this in. I wish someone else could edit these videos. See you on the next one.